Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It was meant to be a peaceful weekend by the lake, just me, my family, and the cabin my father built. But when we arrived, a steel fence blocked our driveway, and a sign declared my land part of a rogue HOA I'd never joined. That was their first mistake. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. We'd packed up the Subaru, loaded the kids with snacks and books, and hit the road like we'd done every summer since I inherited the cabin. 3 acres of fir-fringed peace, tucked beside a quiet lake in Lane County. The kind of place where the biggest emergency might be a raccoon tipping over the compost. So when we turned off the gravel road and saw the gleam of galvanized steel fencing cutting right across our private driveway, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn, but I hadn't. I braked hard, dust curling around us like fog. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, leaning forward. A brand new metal fence stretched across my road. Square poles driven deep into the gravel, locked gate in the middle, and, Jesus, barbed wire coiled neatly along the top like we were dealing with livestock or fugitives. Nailed dead center on the gate was a sun-faded sign that looked like it had been printed in someone's home office. Private HOA land, no trespassing. Below it, in smaller print, Willow Pines Retreat Community. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed. "Daddy, why can't we go in?" my daughter asked from the back. I didn't have an answer, just a rising wave of something between confusion and fury. I got out, walked up to the gate, and shook it. Solid. No keypad, no intercom, just a goddamn lock and 2 surveillance cameras staring at me from the trees like blinking owls. That's when I heard it. A voice, tinny and shrill, crackling out from a hidden speaker mounted on the nearest post. "Attention! You are entering private HOA managed land. Please turn around and vacate the area. This property is not open to the public." I stepped back, stunned. "This is private land, all right?" I called out. "Mine, Jeremy Travis, deed holder." "What the hell is going on?" There was a pause. Then a car door slammed somewhere to the right. A woman in her mid-50s, decked out in a white polo khakis and a baseball cap that read WPR Board President, appeared from a parked SUV like some HOA field marshal. She walked with the stiff-backed posture of someone deeply convinced of her authority. "Mr. Travis," she said as if we were mid-conversation, "you're currently in violation of Willow Pines Retreat Community Guidelines. This parcel was annexed into the association by vote earlier this year. We've posted notice and sent certified mail to the listed owner's address." "No, you haven't," I snapped. "I live in Eugene. I get every damn tax notice, insurance letter, and fishing permit renewal just fine. Nobody ever sent anything like that." Her face tightened. "You're currently trespassing on common access land. You'll need to leave until your membership is reviewed and validated." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Lady, I'm not a member. I've never been a member. This property's been in my family since 1989. It predates your whole HOA fantasy land by at least 3 decades. She didn't flinch. "Well, perhaps you weren't informed, but the lakeside region was rezoned for managed development 2 years ago. We're organizing the area to improve shared amenities, ensure safety, and raise collective property values." "You built a fucking fence across my road. That's not organizing. That's criminal trespass." I pulled out my phone and dialed. "I'm calling the sheriff." Karen, because of course her name was Karen, folded her arms and nodded. "Please do. We've already spoken to law enforcement. They're aware of the boundary dispute. But you're welcome to have them out again if it helps you feel better." I ignored her and stayed on the line. The dispatcher said they'd send a unit. In the meantime, I walked back to the car, told my wife to stay calm, and waited. The deputy arrived about 25 minutes later. Young guy, late 20s, looked about 2 days out of academy, but wore his badge like it weighed 20 pounds. I showed him my ID, my printed deed, photos from last summer of my truck parked right where that fence now stood. Karen approached with her own folder, a laminated map, and a plastic smile. "This is the revised community jurisdiction map," she said sweetly. "And here's the vote from our April board meeting. As you can see, parcel B17, she jabbed her finger at my land, is now within HOA oversight." I tried not to explode. That map isn't legal. It's not from the county. It's a coloring book. And the people who voted, do they own my land? No? Then it doesn't mean anything. The deputy looked genuinely torn. He radioed in, stepped aside to make a few calls, then came back looking like he hated his job. Mr. Travis, he said, at this point, we're treating this as a civil property dispute. We can't force them to remove the fence unless there's a court order. I'd recommend speaking to a lawyer and going through proper channels. Proper channels? I repeated, stunned. They built a fence across my driveway. I can't even get to my own house. I understand, the deputy said, not meeting my eye, but there's no active threat or criminal trespass on record we can act on. This'll have to go to civil court. Karen offered a conciliatory smile like she'd just won prom queen. We're happy to provide him with the necessary paperwork. I'm sure this will all resolve amicably. I stared at her for a long second. Lady, I said slowly, the only thing you're going to provide is a damn good reason for me to buy bolt cutters and a bulldozer. Then I turned to the deputy. We're leaving for now, but I'm coming back. And next time, I'm bringing a hell of a lot more than paperwork. The drive back to Eugene was silent. My wife kept glancing at me like I was a ticking bomb, and the kids had the good sense to stay buried in their tablets. I gripped the wheel harder than I should have and counted every damn pine tree we passed just to keep from screaming. As soon as we got home, I went straight to the closet in my home office and pulled out the black fireproof lockbox where I kept all the documents related to the cabin. I hadn't opened it in over a year, but everything was still in order. Deed, title, tax records, even the old hand-drawn boundary map my dad had sketched back in the 90s. And right there, folded into a plastic sleeve, was the notarized transfer of ownership from him to me, dated, sealed, and registered with the Lane County Recorder's Office. I scanned it all to PDF and emailed it to myself. Then I called up the county assessor's office. Took some bouncing around, but I finally got a real human on the phone, a woman named Teresa, who actually sounded like she gave a damn. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, how someone had erected a fence across the only road into my private property, claimed it was HOA land, and told me I was a trespasser. There was a pause on the line before she said, "Sir, I'm looking at the parcel data right now. Your lot, Travis Lake Cabin, Lot 028, has never been part of any homeowners association. No annexation, no boundary changes, no shared easements on record. And if someone says otherwise, they're either mistaken or lying." That was the moment I stopped being furious and started getting surgical. I asked for copies of the most recent zoning map, parcel history, and any applications for boundary revisions filed in the last 2 years. She sent them over within the hour. I printed them out, spread them across the dining table, and started annotating in red Sharpie like I was planning a hostage rescue. My property was clearly marked, an isolated lakefront triangle with its own access road, outside any shaded HOA zone. The nearest managed parcel was over 100 feet away across a strip of forest. No petitions, no transfer requests, nothing. That night, after the kids went to bed, I reached out to a real estate attorney I'd worked with once before on a plat dispute, Janine Rollins. Young, fast-talking, sharp as a scalpel. She answered my call on the second ring. "Jeremy Travis," she said. "I remember you. What's on fire?" 3 acres of sanity and a fence I didn't build," I replied. Then I gave her the whole story, start to finish, right down to Karen's smug face and the deputy's shrug. Janine whistled low. "You're dealing with a rogue HOA. Happens more than you'd think, especially in areas with recent development. They get ambitious, start drawing fantasy maps and pretending they mean something. Yeah, well, their fantasy is blocking my access to my damn home. Good news is," she said, "you've got standing. We'll start with a formal cease and desist, then prepare a civil complaint for unlawful encroachment, interference with property rights, and harassment. Oh, and don't touch the fence just yet. Let's box them in legally first." She drafted the letter overnight and had it sent by certified mail the next morning. In it, we demanded the immediate removal of the fence, a full explanation of who authorized its construction, and reimbursement for any damages resulting from the obstruction. 2 days later, I got a thick envelope back. The return address was some fancy-sounding law office out of Portland, representing Willow Pines Retreat HOA. The letter inside was a masterpiece of passive aggression. According to them, my property had been incorporated into the jurisdiction of Willow Pines as of June 1st, based on a unified vote of surrounding parcel owners. They claimed ongoing administrative delays had prevented them from sending proper notice, but insisted I was now a member in arrears and subject to assessment obligations dating back to January. They had the audacity to include a fee schedule, $280 monthly in dues, a $400 late fee, and a $500 infrastructure integration surcharge. And, just for fun, a pamphlet on community values with smiling families holding rakes and waving at each other like a pharmaceutical commercial. I read it twice, then burst out laughing. My wife didn't find it funny. "Jeremy," she said, "I know you're right. I know this is insane. But do we really want to spend months in court over this? Maybe we just go around the back next time." "I'm not crawling through the fucking woods to get to my own house," I said. "They're not just wrong. They're trying to take something that doesn't belong to them. If we don't fight this now, they'll think they can do it to anyone." She nodded slowly, knowing full well what kind of storm I was about to walk into. That evening, I emailed Janine copies of the HOA's letter, maps, and my own scans of the official parcel documents. She called within the hour. "They're bluffing," she said. "None of this would hold up in court for 5 minutes. But if they built that fence without a county permit, and you've got the proof to show they're blocking legal access to titled property, then we go nuclear." That word made me smile. We weren't just going to fight, we were going to flatten them. I was done with letters and polite warnings. I'd tried the civil channels, given them the benefit of the doubt, even let the cops shrug their way out of doing anything useful. Now it was time to clear my land the old-fashioned way, with tools, witnesses, and a paper trail thick enough to choke a judge. 3 days after receiving the HOA's little manifesto, I pulled up to the barricade at 8 in the morning with a licensed contractor, 2 hired hands, and a trunk full of equipment. I had hard hats, gloves, bolt cutters, a generator, and a damn coffee thermos the size of a fire extinguisher. We also had printed copies of my deed, the official zoning maps from the county, and a letter of authorization from Janine stating that I had the legal right to access and maintain my property. We weren't there to argue. We were there to reclaim what was mine. I parked the truck inches from the gate and nodded to the crew. "Start with the west panel," I said. "Work slow. Get footage of everything." My contractor, Rick, a retired Marine with the patience of a drill sergeant, unloaded a cordless sawzall and started cutting through the bolts on the first fence post. One of the guys set up a GoPro on a tripod to document the entire process. I stood next to the locked gate, holding a clipboard like some kind of pissed-off building inspector. I wasn't touching anything myself, legally speaking. I was simply present during contracted work to restore private access. Words matter when HOA lunatics are watching, which they were. I saw the black Suburban roll up about 15 minutes in. Karen emerged looking like she'd come straight from a suburban war room, pressed white blouse, tactical sunglasses, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She didn't approach right away. She stood at the tree line, dialing furiously, lips moving fast. Then, seeing we weren't stopping, she marched up to us. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. I didn't even look at her. "Exercising my property rights." "You're trespassing, by the way." "This is community-managed land," she hissed, jabbing a manicured finger at the fence. "You're destroying association property." "No," Rick said, stepping between us like a bouncer. "He's removing unauthorized structures from his own goddamn driveway." She ignored him and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling security." "Please do," I said. "And while you're at it, call the county building inspector. Maybe they'll like hearing about how you installed this fence without a permit on land you don't own." She stepped back, eyes narrowing, and muttered something into her phone. A few minutes later, her so-called security team showed up. 2 middle-aged men in matching polo shirts with a HOA logo and the unmistakable overconfidence of guys who used to play high school football and never quite moved on. One of them, a paunchy guy with mirrored shades, puffed up his chest. "You boys need to pack it up. You're interfering with community infrastructure." Rick barely glanced at him. "Back off, Barney Fife. We've got paperwork, and we're not touching anything outside the documented parcel." "Put down the saw and step away from the fence," the other one said, hand drifting toward his belt like he thought he was carrying a badge. That's when things went sideways. One of the HOA goons lunged forward and grabbed the handle of the bolt cutter Rick had just set down. Instinct kicked in. I stepped between them, and the guy shoved me hard in the chest. Wrong move. I dropped my clipboard, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him into the gravel. Nothing brutal, just a firm takedown. I wrestled in high school and wrestled better after a decade of being underestimated by people like him. He flailed, cursed, tried to get up, but I pinned his arm and held him there, my knee pressing into his back. Rick called out, "Camera's still rolling." Karen shrieked like we'd shot someone. "Assault! I'm calling the police!" You're going to jail." "I encourage it," I said calmly. "The guy just committed battery on my contractor and tried to steal our tools. I'll be happy to file the first report." The other security guy backed off fast, hands raised. Karen was still yelling into her phone when the police cruiser pulled up. Same deputy as last time. He looked tired before he even stepped out. "Folks," he sighed. "What now?" I released the guy, stood up, dusted myself off, and gestured toward the cameras. "It's all on video. They came onto my property, started grabbing equipment, and one of them physically shoved me. We've got maps, permits, and county documentation. We're removing an illegal fence. That's all." The deputy turned to Karen. "Ma'am, is this true?" Karen launched into a breathless speech about community enforcement, legal authority, property values, and delinquent members. Her tone grew shriller by the second. The deputy finally raised a hand. "I'm going to need statements from everyone, and I'd like to see all documents relevant to this fence and the land in question. Nobody's getting arrested today, but I am documenting this as a mutual incident." "You'll both be contacted." "Both?" Karen barked. "You're treating him and me the same?" The deputy gave her a look. "I'm treating this as a dispute over property boundaries, not a war zone." He took our statements, watched some of the video, and made some notes. The HOA guys skulked back to their Suburban, visibly rattled. Karen stood by the gate, glaring like she could vaporize us with her brain. Eventually, she left. We finished cutting through the west panel and rolled it back just enough to drive the truck in. I parked beside my cabin for the first time in over a week and stood there for a long minute, taking it all in. The windows were dusty, the grass too long, but it was still home. Rick clapped me on the shoulder. "You're gonna need a damn moat next." I nodded. "Or a lawyer with a flamethrower." The day after we cleared the gate, I sent Janine a full report, videos, photos, time-stamped statements, and a list of every witness present, including the names of the 2 HOA security officers. Her reply came back in less than 10 minutes. Time to file. We weren't just documenting now, we were prosecuting. Janine's office submitted a formal cease and desist demand to the HOA's legal firm and an emergency motion for injunctive relief in Lane County Circuit Court. The motion was simple. Willow Pines Retreat HOA had unlawfully blocked access to my private property, constructed unpermitted infrastructure across titled land, and instigated physical confrontation under false legal pretense. We demanded the immediate removal of the fence, a temporary restraining order against any further encroachment, and a declaration that their annexation was null and void. Within 48 hours, we received a hearing date. The day of the hearing, I showed up to the courthouse in Eugene in a clean flannel shirt and jeans that didn't have any fresh gravel dust on them. Janine was already waiting for me, dressed like a shark disguised as a librarian, binder in one hand, tablet in the other. She barely looked up as she said, "They brought their big guns." Sure enough, the HOA's lawyers had sent in a 4-man team from a Portland firm that smelled like it billed in 6-minute intervals. At the head of the table sat some guy named Colby, slick suit, dead eyes, and the smug expression of a man who'd spent too much of his life bullying people out of their own land with technicalities. They opened with a masterclass in deflection. Colby claimed my property had been included in a community reorganization initiative back in April, with support from all surrounding landowners, and that their oversight was purely administrative until the new integration bylaws were approved. He presented a revised jurisdictional map printed on heavy cardstock and an act of voluntary inclusion, allegedly signed by 14 property owners. The judge, a tired-looking woman named Kent, flipped through the document with mild disinterest. "Mr. Travis, were you a participant in this inclusion vote?" I stepped up to the mic. "No, Your Honor, I wasn't invited. I wasn't informed, and I most certainly didn't sign anything." Janine rose. "If I may, we've already submitted evidence to the court showing that the petitioner, my client, has owned the parcel in question since 2013, with a deed registered in his name, no history of HOA affiliation, and zero record of any annexation request or zoning amendment filed with Lane County. The opposing party's documents are not recognized by the county and were never submitted to the proper authorities." The judge turned to Colby. "So this integration wasn't recorded with any government agency?" Colby smirked. "It's a community action, Your Honor, internal to our association. The actual legal adjustment was pending review before submission. We believed we had full consent." Janine didn't miss a beat. "They believed incorrectly." Colby shuffled some papers. We contend that the collective will of the community. The judge cut him off. The collective will of the community doesn't trump a recorded deed, counselor. I'll review the motion for injunction and get back to you. It took less than 24 hours. The court issued a temporary injunction forbidding the HOA from conducting any further activities involving my parcel. They were barred from accessing, altering, or administratively managing any portion of my land until full legal clarification. The judge also instructed the county zoning office to confirm the current legal status of the parcel within 10 business days. In the meantime, all HOA actions were effectively frozen. The next day, I drove out to the cabin again, alone this time. The fence was still there, but I didn't stop. I used the newly cleared lane, rolled up to the house, and just sat there with the engine running, listening to the wind move through the trees. But it wasn't over. 2 days later, a new envelope arrived by courier. Inside was the HOA's official counterclaim, filed in civil court. They were suing me for destruction of community property, violation of member conduct standards, and, this part made me laugh out loud, inciting discord among residents. Janine called it a preemptive PR stunt. They're hoping to muddy the water, she said. But we've already got the upper hand. Let them swing. She filed our full complaint that same day. Unlawful obstruction of private access, construction without permits, attempted extortion through false membership claims, and harassment. We backed it all up with copies of county maps, emails, videos, witness statements, and even receipts for the equipment used to clear the fence. But that wasn't the real nail in the coffin. The real blow came from the county zoning board. Their office replied with a formal statement confirming that there had been no boundary expansions or jurisdictional modifications recorded for Willow Pines Retreat in the last 5 years. No pending applications, no annexations, no reclassifications. My parcel was and had always been a separate private entity, not subject to any HOA authority. Janine nearly danced when she read the reply. Now we don't just have documentation, she said. We have the government's word that their entire claim is a fantasy. The judge won't just dismiss their counterclaim, she'll gut it. But we weren't done. Not yet. That night, as I was reviewing old emails, I noticed something odd. One of the files Janine had forwarded, the Act of Voluntary Inclusion from the HOA, contained scanned signatures from my supposed neighbors. Out of curiosity, I compared them to a copy of my dad's old address book. A couple names matched. I decided to make a few calls. What I heard over the phone stopped me cold. At least 4 of the signatories had no idea they'd signed anything about me or my land. One thought it was a petition for a shared boathouse. Another said they just agreed with whatever Karen was doing. One elderly woman swore she never signed anything and didn't even know there was a vote. And then one man told me, in a hushed voice, "We were told not to talk to you. Karen said you were combative and trying to sue everyone." That was the moment the HOA's castle of paper stopped being comical. It became sinister. The more I called, the clearer it became. Karen hadn't just forged a fantasy. She had weaponized it. Most of the neighbors who voted had either signed ambiguous documents under misleading pretenses or hadn't signed at all. Some were intimidated. A few were clearly complicit. But the pattern was undeniable. Manipulation, misrepresentation, and pressure. So I did what any irritated landowner with a printer and too much coffee would do. I wrote a letter, not a rant, not a manifesto. Just a plain, calm, bulleted timeline of events with copies of the relevant documents. My deed, the county map, the injunction, and the part of the HOA's act with signatures that were now publicly questionable. I ended the letter with a single question. Did you know your signature was being used to claim ownership of land you don't own? Then I printed 35 copies, put them in envelopes with a friendly return address, and drove out to Willow Pines. The next morning, no shouting, no drama, just a slow cruise past familiar porches as I dropped envelopes in mailboxes. By the time I reached the last house on the loop, I'd gotten 3 texts and 1 voicemail from concerned residents asking for clarification. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That evening, my inbox exploded. Some of the neighbors were livid. At me, at Karen, at themselves for not paying closer attention. A few apologized outright. One woman, a retired librarian named Martha who lived 2 cabins down from mine, invited me over for coffee and handed me a manila folder. Karen tried to get me on the board last month, she said. said she needed silent support while she handled the heavy lifting. I didn't trust her then, and I trust her even less now. Inside the folder were printed emails, meeting notes, and a scan of a Welcome to Willow Pines packet Karen had tried to distribute as if it were an official county document. One page included a suggested dues adjustment formula for non-compliant lots. My lot was circled in red ink. Janine almost lost her voice laughing when I sent her the scans. It's not even subtle anymore. This is textbook manufactured jurisdiction. If this were a zoning hearing, she'd be laughed out of the building. The folder became Exhibit E in our case, but Karen wasn't backing down. A few days later, I received a formal complaint notice, this time from the Willow Pines Code Enforcement Committee, citing me for unauthorized structural interference and public hostility. The letter threatened a lien on my membership account if I didn't comply with community restitution protocols. It came with a fine $400. That's when I realized Karen was escalating not because she was confident, but because she was panicking. The walls were closing in, and she was clawing at every inch of fake authority she'd ever imagined having. Then the twist came. A man named Gregory Langston, slim, bald, accountant type, knocked on my door late one afternoon. He introduced himself as the newly elected treasurer of the HOA. Unofficial, technically, he said. Karen refused to certify the vote, but people are fed up. He looked exhausted, like a man who'd been tiptoeing through landmines. I read your letter, he said. So did everyone else. She's got some people scared. Others think she's doing this for the good of the neighborhood. I'm here to tell you, this thing's about to implode. Gregory had access to the HOA's internal email list. He didn't give me direct access, but he did forward me a handful of threads, enough to make Janine's jaw clench. Karen had been referring to me by name in multiple board emails as the non-compliant aggressor and a known instigator of community destabilization. In one message, she explicitly stated, if we let him win, others will question the board's legitimacy. We need to send a message. In another, she suggested retroactive dues enforcement as a deterrent. That message was forwarded by Gregory with a single note. She's making it up as she goes. Janine added the messages to our growing file. But the real cherry on top, Gregory handed me a printed page from the HOA's own bylaws. In tiny legalese near the bottom of page 8, any parcel not included in the original recorded HOA boundary map shall require notarized consent from the deeded owner to join, which must be submitted to the county before enforcement. I underlined that line 3 times. It was over for Karen. She just didn't know it yet. By the following Monday, the gloves were off. I wasn't the only one swinging now. Over a dozen residents had begun circulating their own letters, demanding an emergency HOA meeting and threatening to withhold dues until unauthorized leadership activities were addressed. Karen naturally doubled down. She blasted out a mass email declaring the recent unrest a deliberate disinformation campaign orchestrated by a hostile property outsider. She meant me. Apparently, 30-plus years of ownership, a deed with my name on it, and the fact that my cabin was built by my father didn't qualify me as a stakeholder in the utopia she envisioned. I was a disruptive non-member element and a destabilizing force. I was also, according to one particularly spicy email she sent to the board, a threat to neighborhood harmony, safety, and resale value. Resale value. That told me everything I needed to know about her priorities. Meanwhile, the court process churned forward. Janine had already filed a motion for discovery, and we were getting ready for the deposition phase. But what we didn't expect was what landed in my inbox midweek, a document dump. Gregory, bless his disillusioned accountant heart, had leaked to us nearly 400 pages of internal HOA communications, including spreadsheets, board notes, incident reports, and, most damning, an unsigned draft resolution outlining a proposed retroactive dues billing mechanism targeting legacy lots not yet formally transitioned. That would be me. The document included projected income from back-billed dues over a 5-year period, more than $20,000 just from my property alone. There was even a line item labeled potential late fees subject to adjustment upon court review. They had planned to bankrupt me through fiction. Janine practically screamed when she saw it. This is premeditated, coordinated, and criminal if they ever tried to collect on it. We prepared to file an amended complaint citing fraud and attempted extortion, but we weren't the only ones going public. At least 4 other residents, Martha, Gregory, and 2 younger couples, started talking. One of them posted a full summary of the situation on the local Nextdoor page with documents attached. The post exploded. Comments piled up. Neighbors started comparing stories. And suddenly HOA members who had been quiet began peeling off like paint in a fire. Then came the night that sealed Karen's fate. Martha invited me and my wife, Lindsay, over for dinner, a peace offering, she called it. For the years, she'd been a polite but distant neighbor. We brought wine, and before dessert was even on the table, she led us to her den and showed us her computer. Open on the screen was a folder titled HOA Shenanigans. Inside were dozens of files, meeting minutes, recordings, screenshots of Karen threatening to fine the elderly into cooperation. She said that about Mrs. Langley, Martha explained. The woman's 93. Her only crime was asking what the fence was for. The 3 of us sat in silence, and then I said what we were all thinking. We need to burn it down. Not literally, not violently, but publicly. This wasn't about fences anymore. This was a sick little empire built on fear and silence, and it was time to break that spell. 2 days later, a neighborhood-wide email went out, co-signed by 8 residents, requesting a full audit of HOA leadership activities, a pause on all enforcement actions, and a special vote on Karen's removal. The email included the scanned bylaws Gregory had provided, the same ones that made her inclusion scheme null and void. Karen's reply was unhinged. She accused the signatories of seditious behavior, claimed the audit was a hostile coup, and threatened legal action for defamation and organized rebellion. The words organized rebellion were in bold, underlined, and italicized. It backfired beautifully. The very next day, someone printed the entire email chain and tacked it to the HOA's notice board with the heading, "We pay her salary." Later that night, someone else added a sticky note. Not for long. The bonfire had been lit. All I had to do was wait for the kindling to catch. By Friday morning, the whole neighborhood was humming with quiet rebellion. I walked the main loop around Willow Pines just after sunrise, coffee in hand, and saw the signs. Subtle, but clear. Mailboxes with red flags up. HOA notices torn in half and stuffed behind porch railings. At least 2 homes had hung simple white sheets in their front windows with big black "as" painted on them. Silent protest. The kind of thing you only see when people are too polite to riot. Karen, however, wasn't going quietly. She started flooding inboxes with what she called HOA safety bulletins, which were essentially thinly veiled warnings, threats of citations for unauthorized gatherings, talk of external agitators, and one particularly unhinged paragraph about potential revocation of property privileges for members in violation of unity standards. Unity standards. I almost choked on my toast when I read that one. The community meeting was scheduled for Sunday evening at the Little Community Lodge on Pine Hollow Drive. Karen tried to cancel it via email, declaring it illegitimate, but the residents ignored her. Someone made flyers. Someone else rented folding chairs. When I pulled up that evening with Lindsay and the kids, the gravel lot was full. Over 50 people were already there. Most of them I only knew from a wave or nod across the lake. But tonight, they looked like a town preparing for trial. Martha opened the meeting with a calm voice and a 3-ring binder full of timelines, maps, and highlighted bylaws. Then came Gregory with printouts of financial statements and draft resolutions Karen had circulated without member consent. A third neighbor, a tech guy named Lionel, had brought a projector. On screen, we watched a slideshow of HOA documents. Fake fines, manufactured maps, internal emails, all punctuated by screenshots of the county's zoning database showing no changes whatsoever. Then I was asked to speak. I didn't prepare anything. I just told the truth about the fence, about being blocked from my own land, about being called a trespasser on property my family had owned for over 3 decades. I told them how I'd found neighbors' names on fake documents, how Karen had called an old woman a threat, how the fence wasn't just metal, it was control. The room was quiet, not frozen, not hostile, just absorbing. Then someone clapped. Then everyone did. Karen wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. But 2 of her inner circle were Mrs. Keeley, who had always seemed too bored to care, and a lanky guy named Vincent, who once ran the HOA's landscaping subcommittee. They didn't clap. They didn't speak. But they didn't leave either. At the end of the meeting, a vote was called. Should the community pursue Karen's formal removal under the HOA's internal bylaws? The tally wasn't close. 47-3, 2 abstentions. The room erupted in cheers, and a few people even hugged. One man stood up and shouted, "Burn it down, Jeremy!" I laughed and held up both hands. Not literally. The motion passed. A recall was now in process, but Karen still had tricks up her sleeve. The next morning, a letter was taped to my cabin's front door. No envelope, just cheap printer paper with an ugly font and an uglier message. You are in violation of community standards. This is your final warning. Cease your activities or consequences will escalate. No signature, no HOA letterhead, just fear, amateurishly disguised. I filed a police report immediately. The officer didn't seem surprised. "You're not the first one to get something like this," he said, tucking the note into an evidence bag. "But you might be the last." And that was the real sign. The power Karen had clung to was unraveling fast. Her inner circle was shrinking. Her narrative collapsing. The neighborhood wasn't scared anymore. They were angry. And anger was louder than fear. The dominoes were already falling. I just had to make sure the last one hit the ground hard enough to leave a dent. The recall paperwork was filed by Monday morning. Official sealed, logged with the Lane County Mediation Board. Karen now had 10 days to respond or step down. It should have been a formality, a clean removal after overwhelming community vote. But of course, Karen wasn't wired for quiet exits. That same day, a county building inspector showed up at my gate, clipboard in hand and confusion on his face. He asked if I was erecting non-compliant structures within a restricted parcel zone. I laughed. Then I realized he wasn't joking. Karen had filed a zoning complaint with the county claiming I was expanding infrastructure without permits, based on the contractor crew I'd hired weeks ago to remove the illegal HOA fence. According to her, the very act of reclaiming access to my own driveway was a construction project violating setback laws. Luckily, I'd kept meticulous receipts. The contractor I'd hired had logged everything, including photographic records of the work done, which was, in total, removing 6 metal fence panels and 2 cemented gateposts. No earth moved, no structures added, no violations committed. The inspector reviewed the documents, nodded and muttered, "Looks like someone's trying to weaponize our department." He closed the case within the hour and even apologized for the intrusion, but the point had been made. Karen wasn't fighting for control anymore. She was trying to salt the earth on her way out. That evening, I came home to find someone had poured motor oil across my gravel driveway. Not a massive amount, but enough to stain and stink. It was petty childish sabotage. I didn't even bother calling the cops for that one. I knew it was her. Everyone did. But I also knew her grip was slipping fast. Janine was preparing to file for a court order to bar Karen from initiating any further HOA actions without board approval. Meanwhile, Gregory and Martha were working double time to prepare for a full leadership restructure. The new agenda was simple: undo every single overreach Karen had orchestrated. But Karen wasn't quite done spinning her delusions into threats. That Wednesday, residents received a mass email titled "Legal Consequences for Unauthorized Meeting." In it, Karen claimed the recall was invalid, the vote illegally coordinated, and promised to initiate binding arbitration. She even named me specifically, saying, "Mr. Travis has intentionally destabilized the community and must answer for his role in these events." She attached a PDF of a special assessment proposal claiming all members, myself included, despite my clear non-membership, now owed a $1,200 HOA stabilization levy. That was the moment the HOA board collapsed. Vincent, the landscaping guy who had stayed quiet at the meeting, finally broke. He sent a mass resignation letter to all residents, stating, "I can no longer be part of an organization that uses fear, fiction, and fraudulent documents to intimidate property owners." 3 more board members followed suit by nightfall. With over half the board gone, Karen legally couldn't conduct business as president. And yet, like a dethroned queen yelling at shadows, she kept issuing orders to no one. By Thursday, her last supporters were ducking calls, pretending not to be involved. HOA meetings were being scheduled without her. The county received a formal petition to investigate possible misuse of funds. Martha even got an email from a local news reporter asking if she'd be willing to talk. And me. I walked out to my cabin porch that night, sipped a cold beer, and stared out at the lake. The forest was still. The stars looked sharp and mean. And down by the end of the access road, the twisted remains of Karen's metal gate still lay in a heap, rusting, useless, and quiet. It wasn't over yet, but it was close. The dragon wasn't breathing fire anymore. She was flailing in a mud puddle, and the whole village was watching. The court date landed on a Monday. Janine and I arrived early, spotting Karen pacing outside with her lawyer, a man who looked like he regretted everything about his week. Inside, the courtroom filled with familiar faces: Martha, Gregory, Vincent, even a few neighbors just there for the show. Janine submitted our full evidence: deed records, maps, fake dues, notices, threatening emails. I took the stand and calmly explained the timeline: fence, false HOA claims, police standoff, and forged documents. Karen rolled her eyes throughout, but the judge wasn't impressed. Martha followed with HOA bylaws, reading them like commandments. Gregory revealed HOA expenses that had never been authorized. Even Vincent testified none of Karen's expansions were legal, and the board never voted for any of it. Then Karen took the stand and fell apart. She claimed residents had implicitly agreed to join the HOA. When the judge asked if she expected the court to ignore the official land registry in favor of a neighborhood vote, Karen responded, "Maybe. Reinterpret." A quiet chuckle rippled through the room. The verdict came quickly. The HOA had acted outside its authority. The fence was illegal. Karen was personally liable for harassment, misrepresentation, and attempted fraud. She owed $34,000 in damages, was barred from HOA leadership for 5 years, and prohibited from contacting my family. We stepped outside into the sun. Gregory shook my hand. Martha teared up. Janine just smiled and said, "Now it's really over." That Saturday, I took my daughter fishing. The lake was still, no fences, no signs, no Karen, just water, birds, and quiet. It finally felt like ours again. Within days, a hired crew, paid for by the HOA, came to dismantle the metal fence. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching every post, panel, and bolt disappear into the back of a truck. Later that week, I installed new gate posts and hung a clean green sign: "Private property, Travis Family Cabin. Not part of any HOA. Trespassers will meet the law again." Lindsay asked if it was a warning or a memoir title. "Maybe both," I said. The new HOA board sent a formal apology, along with a legal document affirming my property's independence from their jurisdiction. I framed it and hung it by the door, a strange, satisfying trophy. As for Karen, gone. Rumor was she moved to Eugene and argued with baristas instead of neighbors. Around here, her name faded like an old stain. People changed, more neighborly, more curious, more alert. No one wanted a repeat. No one wanted another Karen. And no one wanted to go through what I did just to keep their land their own. I kept her old private HOA land sign and mounted it on the back wall of my shed. A reminder that peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing your ground. Because when they try to fence you out of your own home, you have to tear the fence down. You always know what side of the line you're on.